Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoterica and our continuing series on the Mr. FPGA DE10 Nano project. More importantly this week, testing new Sega Saturn games on the current core. Because you guys keep leaving requests for me to test games, you keep wanting to watch what is working and what is not, so I figured it's time for another Saturn testing video since it's been about a month since I did the last one. Before I get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But Mr. Saturn is here. It's still work in progress, but it is still amazing. In the last few videos, I talked about Street Fighter Alpha 3 in a game that I could not get running, but I did have footage from Street Fighter Alpha 2, and I thought I'd use it, but apparently I did not. This is also working great on the current core, although it really doesn't have much sound whatsoever. But the Sega Saturn was an awesome console for Capcom arcade ports, much more so than the PlayStation 1, and it is working here, and you can see it's fluid, it's fast, all of the inputs are exactly as you would expect. It is just the Street Fighter Alpha 2 you know and love. And leave me a comment down below and tell me if you like Alpha 2 or Alpha 3 better. I am much more of an Alpha 3 player, but I know a lot of people consider Alpha 2 to be the better of the two games, so I would be curious. But as far as Alpha 2 playing on Mr. is concerned, it is working today. You can 100% check it out and do a two-player game. I can't recommend you do it enough because it is awesome. Now onto fighting games that aren't as awesome, Primal Rage is also running on the current Saturn core. I know there's a lot of fans of Primal Rage out there, and it is a really fun and interesting game, but it also is that 90s jank that I love talking about on the channel. But you can't go wrong with another fun fighting game. You will see that sometimes the screen is black at the bottom. I don't recall that happening on original hardware, so it might just be a screen space issue. But leave me a comment down below and you tell me, because I actually don't own a copy of Primal Rage on Saturn. It's never been a game that I've been interested in picking up either as an arcade PCB or as a Saturn game. But again, it's fast, it's fluid. The sound effects work sometimes, but it's pretty scratchy and pretty muffled, so it's not something I'm going to let you listen to. It's one of those games where it's functioning perfectly fine, but the sound just isn't quite there. But again, on a little bit of a fighting game kick at the beginning of this video, you can 100% play both Street Fighter Alpha 2, Street Fighter Alpha 3, and Primal Rage on Mr. today. I'd recommend 2 of those 3 games. Primal Rage, take it or leave it. Now moving on to a completely different genre, we have Touge King 2 The Spirits. This is a racing game developed by Cave, the same company well known for their bullet hell shmups. And while their shmups are definitely their bread and butter and what they're known for and what I love them for, they make a decent 3D game on the Sega Saturn too. But this is the type of game you either absolutely love or absolutely hate. There is no in between, and learning these games takes a ton of hours. Now Andy D helped me out with some captures this week because I was away celebrating my 10th wedding anniversary. I was also on vacation, and if you don't like the driving, blame him, but trust me, if I was playing, I'd be bumping into these same walls in the same manner, because this is a very difficult game, but it is a visual treat on Sega Saturn. It's got a ton of good polygons, and there isn't really much warping either, and this tunnel here looks spectacular with that pseudo lighting. And while there is absolutely no audio in this capture outside of a few scratches, all of the visuals are working exactly as you would expect. So if you're looking for a really interesting racing game, you can do a lot worse than testing this on your Sega Saturn today. Now from the user request bin, Magic Knight Rayearth, everyone has been asking for this to appear in a testing episode. I thought I had done it, but I went back and watched my captures and could not find it. But I am here to tell you, at least from what is played here, everything seems to be working perfectly fine. The cutscenes are playing, they're not skipping, they're not freezing. All of the audio in the cutscenes is excellent as well. It just seems to 100% work. So if there's any discrepancies between this and original hardware, I cannot see them, but leave me a comment down below and you tell me if you notice anything that's off. Because a lot of times somebody will have this as their favorite game of all time and they will notice something that I just do not know looking through 20, 30, 40, 50 Saturn videos in a row. And I love this game's sense of humor as well. We start off here and this dude is just thinking it's an ancient game because it's a yellow pie with little white dots. He's just talking about Pac-Man, and this old man here is just crapping on the concept of video games in general. It is a very tongue-in-cheek game. It's got a great sense of humor, and I do love it for that. It's going to be great to play this on Saturn. Just remember, it doesn't save, so don't expect to get a good playthrough of this in quite yet. But I'm going to let you listen to some audio because it's like 95% of the way there, but it's a good example of what's going on, so enjoy, and I'll be right back.
Magic Knights, I summon thee. Where are we? Hello? Anybody home? It seems as if no one is at home right now.
Perhaps this isn't even Precia's house.
Did you see that? The door just opened. What kind of person leaves their home unlocked? It's not safe.
Well, let's not waste time just talking about it.
You mean go into the house? Isn't that bad manners?
So you can hear that the music sounds great and all of the audio dialogue does as well, but underneath there, when there's no audio actually playing, there is that little bit of hissing underneath. Now, of course, this is Myst, not real hardware, so it isn't a ground hum in the audio channel, but it kind of presents itself as being that. It's probably just a little bit of code or silicon not connected in the logic of Myst, but it is an example of what sometimes you hear. Now moving on to an absolutely incredible game for all the right reasons, we have Segata Sanshiro here, the mascot for the Sega Saturn, and probably the best thing Sega has ever done. Leave me a comment down below and tell me you love Segata Sanshiro, and if you say you don't, I'll probably ban you from the channel. All jokes aside though, it's a really fun, weird mini game for the Sega Saturn, taking on the different commercials that Sega produced back in the day for Saturn featuring Segata Sanshiro. It's a whole lot of Saturns in one sentence, but I managed to get them all out. And you do get some of those commercials on the game as well. Segata Sanshiro here, training with a gigantic Sega Saturn. I bet that's on a warehouse somewhere. It's Sega. You can probably go and look at it now if you work there. At least that is my hope. But this game is just so much fun. It's so weird. It's so representative of what Sega was doing in the 90s. Just basically making things up as they went along and having fun. And it works exactly as you would expect on the current work in progress Sega Saturn core. It doesn't have the most audio in the world, but you can totally do this rhythm game with Segata Sanshiro right here, and that's probably reason enough to buy a Mr. FPGA if only to play this game. All jokes aside, it's one of those games people have been asking me to test it. I do have a copy on my shelf and I figured why not. Now on the list of games that have improved since the previous core, we have NBA Jam here, and again, don't forget, if you're not using John Stockton, you're not playing the game correctly. Greatest NBA player of all time, leave me a comment down below and agree with me. But the last time I played this game, it seemed to have some speed issues. It was laggy, and it felt like the game wasn't playing at full speed. And this is one of those games, everyone remembers it from either PlayStation 1, Sega Saturn, or the arcades, and a lot of people owned this back in the day when they owned a Saturn. Trust me, it was on my shelf, and it still is. But it's happy to say that this game is running a lot better here than it did on the previous core. You can get a whole game in as a two-player experience, so go ahead and check it out with your friends, and don't forget, John Stockton or nothing. Now moving on to a different NBA Jam Extreme, that is now working on the Sega Saturn. It didn't used to work before. Now don't expect the most out of NBA Jam Extreme. It is a fun game, but it's a completely different 3D pivot from the arcade original, and this is definitely better on PlayStation 1 or on PlayStation 1 based arcade hardware. And you'll see here it is working as you would expect in full 3D. The court's in 3D, all of the players are, the audience and arena, everything is 3D outside of some of those audience sprites doing nothing. And while the AI in this game is incredibly stupid and throws up bricks and airballs all the time, this is a good example of how the 3D rendering is currently going on the Sega Saturn core, because you have these 4 different character models running around at any given time, and they all look good. Some of these special effects when people are running don't exactly transpose to Mr. currently correctly, but you have to have an eagle eye on that. But if you watch the ball, sometimes it gets a little bit out of sorts. But honestly, it's another fun game, and it's now working on the Saturn core where it never used to before, and it's always great to see games that didn't used to run work now. It means we're getting closer to a final sort of core. Threw up a brick there, and I do love that it turns into a brick. Now on the games that are just 100% perfectly working, and I can't tell any difference between the original hardware, Liquid Kids here on Saturn just works. And it seems like a lot of the Taito games developed by Ving work on the current core, and that is probably because they developed them in the same manner. So whatever SRG 320 has done in the logic to get Saturn ready, it must adhere to all of these different games. And this is another absolute Hall of Fame first ballot classic Taito arcade game that is absolutely perfect on Saturn and Mr. And trust me, the audio, if there's any issue whatsoever, I can't hear it. So go ahead and listen for 30 seconds. I'll come back and show you some more games. Sounds exactly as I was expected to, and it's got a lot of Pooley Rula vibes in the soundtrack as well, and that's another game that works perfectly on the current core, and I showed it a few weeks ago. But if you put me next to a Sega Saturn and a Mister and let me play this game on both pieces of hardware, and I couldn't see what the game was running on, I do not think I would be able to tell which one was original hardware and which one was Mister. Now that's not the case for all the games in this video, but as far as Liquid Kids is concerned, if it's not identical to real hardware, I certainly cannot tell. Now moving on to a completely different 2D game, Batman Forever. This is just a straight up very strange and weird and janky beat 'em up game that is 100% worth playing and super fun, especially with a second player. And it's got such a unique art style here, almost feels like pre-rendered sprites, but it brings in a lot of different FMV elements as well in the backgrounds in some areas. It's just a strange game, but it's 100% perfectly working as far as the gameplay is concerned on Saturn. Some of the audio can be scratchy, but bring a second player, have a couple beers, and play this. You're going to have an absolute blast, and it does so many strange things that never happen in the Batman games or movies or comic books whatsoever. It basically just takes the concept of Batman and does whatever the hell it pleases with it in some of the best ways possible. But this is a very fast game where you can play as Micro Batman. It is a power down, it makes no sense, but it's kind of funny to watch. And when you're playing this on Mister, this is running as fast as should be expected. All of the inputs are timely, and that is one of the reasons why this is such a great test, because it is such a fast-paced game. If it wasn't running at full speed on Mister, you would 100% be able to tell very quickly, but it is doing exactly that. And it also has an awesome soundtrack as well that doesn't really work too well, but when the core gets updated again, if you're looking for a new, fun, weird game to test, Batman Forever is definitely one I would recommend, because you can also just shrink your opponents down and just start beating on them. It's like Batman is just kicking action figures, and that is always a good time. But gameplay wise, Batman Forever on the current Mister core, 10 out of 10, can definitely recommend it. And of course, we got to put a shmup in a Saturn testing video. There's so many good shmups on there, and a lot of people have been asking about Steam Hearts, and I'm happy to say, at least in this gameplay capture, it seems to be working perfectly fine. Now the thing about this is, with this Saturn work in progress core, different people get different results. Just because something's working when I show it to you doesn't mean it's going to be working when you test it, and some games that I can't get to run, other people seem to be able to. But another great part about Steam Hearts, it's got an awesome soundtrack, awesome sound effects, and they're sounding pretty close to perfect on the core here. So go ahead and listen for 30 seconds and I'll show you one more game.
Missile. Homing laser. Homing laser. Volno. Volno. Shear. Nail shot. Lightning.
Sounds exactly as I would expect it to if I was playing on original hardware, but if you hear anything different, leave me a comment down below, because the more ears the merrier. Now the last game in this roundup of tests is Tenchi Muyo. It's basically Puyo Puyo meets Tetris, and it has some awesome voiceover acting going on with these kind of anime still cutscenes. I have absolutely no idea what's going on in the story because it's all in Japanese, and it doesn't really matter because it's a puzzle game and the story is a little bit superfluous. But this is another absolute fun game that you can play alone or with friends, and it's another one of those games that you don't hear mentioned as much as far as Sega Saturn games to play is concerned. But this was a viewer request, so of course we're going to feature it here. A big thanks again to Andy D for getting me this capture, because I've had the busiest last month probably in the last couple of years. But this is just another awesome game that's 100% working right now. You can get through multiple rounds, the soundtrack, the sound effects, the gameplay. It's another example of a game that if it has any differences between original hardware and FPGA recreation by SRG 320, I would not have absolutely any idea that there were so. And that's the thing, more games in the current core just work, and I do air quotes while I'm doing these voiceovers. You just couldn't tell if they were original hardware or FPGA, and that's what you would expect out of Mister, and that's what we're getting a lot in this current core. But that's the current batch of Sega Saturn tests. Leave me a comment down below and let me know what you want me to test next video. I do have a very long list of user requests, and just because I haven't gotten to yours yet doesn't mean I'm not going to get to it eventually. It just is one of those things. There's so many games on the Saturn, and I can only fit so many into a video. But the current core on Mister is working so well. A lot of new games that never used to work are now functioning, and some games that work but were a little rough are now a lot better. Short of that, I'll have another Mister video next week and videos throughout the week, but I am done. Bye bye.